Good afternoon and welcome back to the Coolidge Corner Theater for this year's in-person program celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And it's really great to see all of you in person. It's great to see everyone in person. You look much better than on Zoom. Okay. I'm Bernard Green, member of the Brookline Select Board and chair of the Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee. Over the past 6 years that I have chaired this committee, we have tried to do more than present the usual perfunctory programs about Martin Luther King on this day. Rather, the committee has sought to challenge and expand the audience's understanding of issues of human and civil rights, and with the topics we present, the quality of our speakers, and the use of poetry and music to help people access the dimensions or additional dimensions of the topics that our speakers discuss. Our keynote speaker today is Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Edward Larson, whose new book, I'll give you a plug, available out in the lobby, American Inheritance, Liberty and Slavery in the Birth of a Nation, 1765 to 1795. As I said, it's available in the lobby this afternoon, and tomorrow, or beginning tomorrow, it will be available at Booksmith's bookstore. It's a great read, as you'll gather from Professor Larson's talk. It pulls together information on the birth of America that is not new, but is scattered and blurred throughout the historical record. Professor Larson presents a thorough and cogent story of the voices and the perspectives of the generals and statesmen, but also the free and enslaved black men and women who were involved in the struggle for liberty and against slavery in the lecture halls, in the slave quarters, and on the battlefields on both sides of the Revolutionary War. And that struggle exposed, which is going to be, I think, part of the topic of Professor Larson's talk, the lack of a basic agreement on the very meaning of the words liberty and slavery between black colonists and their anti-slavery and abolitionist allies and the slave-owning or slave-supporting patriots. We also have two well-known and esteemed local poets on our program, Reggie Gibson, who has performed at each of the past 6 years of this event, and Brookline's Poet Laureate, Jennifer Barber. Their poems will require active listening on your part, which will help you see how they relate to Ed Larson's talk in ways that we hope will open up additional ways for you to think about this topic. I would be remiss on this MLK Day 2023 in Boston, Massachusetts, if I did not mention the recent installation of the incredible sculpture called The Embrace on the Commons. It's sort of an abstract sculpture, but if you really look at it and know that it's a rendering of an actual embrace of Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King after the Nobel Prize celebration, and there's a photo of that embrace. If you see that photo, you see that the sculpture is really not that abstract. It's really very, very real, and it really gives you a sense of both that moment as well as their love and their relationship in the movement. So I urge you to go down and spend a few minutes, a few hours, or whatever at that statue and think about Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King. This event, we will begin this program with the traditional singing of Lift Every Voice and Sing, performed by the Joyful Voices of Inspiration Choir. Come on. The song is based on a poem by James Weldon Johnson and put to music by his brother, J. Rosamond Johnson. who studied here in Boston at the New England Conservatory. This song, since the beginning of the 20th century, has often been called the Negro National Anthem and is often sung at political, social, and religious gatherings of Black people. To reflect the song's solemn and hopeful appeal for liberty, it is traditional for people who are able to stand during the singing. So, without further ado, let every voice and sing till every heaven ring, ring with the harmony of liberty. Let every rejoicing rise high as the lifting sky. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith and the darkness has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope and the present has brought us. Sing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chasing rod, felt in the days let hope on home and die. Yet with a steady beat, and our weary feet, come to the place of which our heart is high. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path with the blood of the slaughtered. Hallelujah, press till we stand at last, where the white fleet of the Christ's already stands. Our weary years, God of our silent tears, Malcolm has brought us the way. Malcolm has by thy might led us into the light. Keep us forever in the path we pray. Bless our feet, straight from the places our God where we met thee. Bless our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world we forget thee. Shall we need thy hand? May we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. So many of us who have participated in this event over the last 6 years are looking forward to Reggie Gibson. Before we move to Reggie, however, I'd like to add a more somber note, a remembrance of a local giant, Bobby Nabel, who passed away last year. Bobby was a member of the MLK committee from the beginning, a member of town meeting, the town's advisory committee, high school building committee, and Brookline PACS, which is a 6-decade-old organization of progressive activists, among her many other contributions to Brookline. And Bobby lived the life that Martin Luther King modeled for all of us. During her long life, she and her late husband, Norman, suffered from racism and discrimination, including here in Brookline. But she never forgot or ignored those experiences, while at the same time never allowing them to entrap her in hatred and grievance. We are fortunate to have her loving son, Jacob, in the audience, I believe. And in remembrance of Bobby, we want to present a short video clip from a 2018 program of the MLK Committee called Facing Civil Rights. After the video, please spend a few quiet moments to reflect on the video, and if you knew Bobby, to reflect on what you knew of her life and what she did for our town. And think of something we can learn from Bobby so that her memory may be a blessing.
Bobby Nabel was born in Knoxville, Tennessee. She never knew her mother, who died as a result of giving birth to Bobby. Raised in Ohio by her great aunt, Bobby attended Oberlin College. Bobby moved to New York, where she became the civil rights chair of the West Side Democratic Club before taking a job with the Congress of Racial Equality. In New York, Bobby met the love of her life, Norman Nabel, a nuclear physicist for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The couple married and decided to move to the Boston area. A factor in their decision was the reality that in 1963, the Nabels' interracial marriage was considered illegal in 21 United States. Bobby and Norman Nabel purchased a home in Brookline. Norman picked the home without Bobby so that the realtor, seller, and bank would not find out that Bobby was Black. Bobby went on to serve as Dean of Students at Tufts University for 20 years. In Brookline, she served on several committees, including the Advisory and the MLK Celebration Committees. In August 2018, Bobby agreed to tell her story, including her recollections of the civil rights movement, moving to a segregated Brookline in the 1960s, and her experiences as a Black woman in the United States. The following are clips from Facing Civil Rights, featuring Bobby Nabel.
In college, I didn't have a sense of race, except when I was a senior. I was dating a white student, and we went to a bar. A group of maybe 4 or 5 young white men asked my date to come outside for a moment. As soon as he got out, they started to beat him. I could see the bruises and injuries that he had suffered. I kept apologizing to him. I kept saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't have a sense of myself that one should have to pay for being with me by suffering that kind of abuse. What I would like to have been able to say was, but I'm worth it. It was all of those sort of anonymous people behind the ones that were well known in front of the march, who had jobs that they could lose. If you couldn't be a part of that directly, and at risk at the level that they were, then you had an obligation at least to take note of what they were doing and to be grateful for their willingness to do it. And I was very fortunate in my husband. It was always clear that he loved and valued me, that some of the things that happened and that were the result of race, it never occurred to him to see me as the fault. And I think that that also preserved for me a sense of my own worth. We were married for 42 years before he died. And I cannot imagine a better relationship, nor can I imagine my being more fortunate. It's important to me now because I see in our son the best traits of my husband. So you go about doing the normal things. You're shopping for groceries or something, and your mind is on something else. All of a sudden, you're reminded by someone or something that you're also Black, and that often comes as a surprise. I think that it would be useful for whites to know how frequently that happens.
Thank you. Take those thoughts back with you throughout your day and future days, and learn from Bobby Nabel's model. Okay. Next up is a poet, performer, artist, great intellectual, Reggie Gibson, who has been performing at our Martin Luther King celebration events for the last 6 years, and everyone has enjoyed his performances. Whether it's him alone, performing his own poetry, reading others' poetry, or performing with musical accompaniments. A couple years ago, he had a string quartet that was quite unique and very, very good. Reggie, let us know what you have to say today.
And I want to thank whoever put that video together about Bobby. And met Bobby years ago when I started doing this, and right away was struck by how much she reminded me of the women in my family who just get it done. Just handle it and make it happen. And it was great to hear the voice of Bobby, and that's what we have. Voice was something I was thinking about a lot as I was contemplating what to do. Professor Larson is giving a dissertation on about voices, conflicting voices in liberty and slavery today. And so in thinking about that, it brought me back to time when I was working at an exhibit at James Madison's Montpelier, which is in Montpelier, Virginia. The exhibit is called The Mere Distinction of Color. And once you go to this exhibit, what you'll see is some cutouts and a lot of things, and you'll hear the voices of people who, they're not their actual voices, but they're people who used to work in the house, and we gave voices to that. And it's interesting when you go up into James Madison's study, where he has all of these books, and there's a window there, and in that window it looks out over a sprawling field where several hundred enslaved people were working. And it is believed by the scholars that at that window is where he penned the Bill of Rights. So you can understand that tugging and that pulling that must have been there in that moment. And I thought about the voices of those people we don't get to hear. Voices of history of folks we don't get to hear. People who are responsible for many of us being here, and we don't get to hear them. And in this time of pandemic, we all know that this is not the only time that we've been through a pandemic. And this guy, named Onasimus, is a person who helped us through one of the greatest pandemics in Massachusetts history, and that would be the smallpox outbreak of 1721. In poetry, when we do poems based upon the voices of other people, we call them persona poems. And I'm going to deliver for you two of them today. One is the voices of a person, and this is the voice of Onasimus. I am called Onasimus. I am told it means useful. Though my body was brought here and then bought here in Boston, my mind and spirit were never of this place. They were filled with Africa. Onasimus, Cotton Mather asked, have you ever had smallpox? Well, yes and no. You see, my people know how to take the juice from the sore of the sickness and scratch it into the skin, and in this way we've learned to make a shield. Cotton Mather, yes. The Puritan minister who laid the groundwork for the Salem witch trials, to that Cotton Mather I was given as a gift for his use by his Christian congregation. So you'll understand if I could never find any use for their God, a God who would neither protect me from them nor protect them from disease. Mather couldn't imagine that what I told him was true, but as smallpox raged through Boston, he kept note of how I and the others, meaning Africans, were not getting sick. So eventually he told the city doctors what I told him, but they would not even consider that I, an unchristianized African born of sin, could be a sign of grace, that the butte and scorn could serve as a savior and might know how to make a miracle. One after another, these very learnt men of Boston rejected the procedure and argued, we will never trust the word of a slave. Only one, a Dr. Zabdiel Boylston, would try it. And when it worked on white bodies, did Boylston thank me? No. Did Mather thank me? No. Mather thanked his God and then cast me out. And even the name he gave me, Onasimus, was written out of American history. Until now, Onasimus, I am told it means useful. So, thank you. So, this enslaved individual was responsible for inoculations here in the colonies. Cotton Mather got it from him, and as we see, Zabdiel Boylston, who listened, he got threatened. People threw a bomb into his home, did the same to Mather, but the wick fell out of the bomb, and therefore it did not go off, because Zabdiel Boylston was trying to inoculate people. You can see he got Fauci'd, right? In the 18th century, he got Fauci. People didn't believe it. They said, if God has given this to us, who are we to try to circumvent what God wants? And of course, many more people died than needed to die because folks would not listen to a voice that they believed had nothing to tell them. Another one of the voices I was listening to as I was going through James Madison's home is behind James Madison's homes, you will see the quarters of the enslaved. And you will see a story going on between what was happening at the big house and what's going on with those slave quarters. And it struck me that these places also have voices. What have they witnessed? What have they seen? If they could speak, if this land could talk, if this edifice had voice, what would it say? I was lucky enough to be appointed poet laureate at the Museum of African American History here in Boston. And the place I was working in was called the African Meeting House. It's one of those places where too few of us get around to. Too few of us get around to it. And we should get around to it more. And I'm assuming Professor Larson would tell you we need to get around to these historic places. And so this is from the perspective of this place and the history that it has seen. Do not be fooled by window frame and paint, nor by landing and step, the stream of electric light by doorway, concrete, and tempered glass. This building is more than building. It is body. It is bone. It is a breathing, living ancestor, a soul that knows and feels. And it asks us to open ourselves to all it has witnessed. It asks us to listen to what it has seen and heard. It asks us to see the emaciated, newly self-emancipated, shambling through its doors into its aisles. Imagine small, quivering bundles cooing beneath their quivering arms. See the bloodshot fear in their eyes as they look over their shoulders for paddy rollers, slave patrollers who would send them back into chain. See their branded backs latticed from bull whip, their manacle mangled feet torn by travel and travail. Now, see the woman walk toward them, her hand a kindness of food and water. She opens her mouth, here and here. This meeting house is now your harbor and your home. This building that is more than building wants us to hear the children of the A.B.L. Smith School learning their letters, deciphering the code of written language that had been kept from their grasp. Imagine their eyes widening as their minds slowly unweed and begin blooming into gardens. Feel Mariah Stewart's feminist fire, her words burning and blistering exhortations demanding the full and untethered inclusion of women into the decision-making body of this republic. Hear David Walker appealing for a vigorous black confrontation of slavery and insisting that whites Christianize their actions rather than merely their rhetoric. Hear William Lloyd Garrison's abolitionist cantor calling for an end to all chains, whether they be put on man or woman, on body or mind. And see Frederick Douglass bear witness to his untamable graying head lathered in lamplight, his determined face tight with nostril flare as he eloquently indicts this country for not becoming its creed. Yes, this building is more than building, more than brick and board, more than wainscot and 2x4, more than hammer pound and rounded pew. This building that is more than building is an open mouth singing of freedom. It is black hands clapping out the rhythm of this country's collective heartbeat. It is Thursday evening prayer meetings and Sunday morning saint shouts from congregations punctuating the preacher's pronouncements from the pulpit that we today need so desperately to hear and heed. Unity of purpose, respect for each other, resistance to injustice. Say it with me. Unity of purpose, respect for each other, resistance to injustice. One more time. Unity of purpose, respect for each other, resistance to injustice. No, do not be fooled. These pews are still peopled by spirits. Every rafter and wall is weighted with voices waiting to break into us and lend us the strength to link our separate selves into a bridge spanning the wide white space between justice and for all. Yes, this building is more than building. It is an ancestor filled with ancestors. Ancestors calling us to see, calling us to witness, calling us to act. Listen. Thank you.
Reggie is one of the performers that we're so lucky to be able to have participate in our programs. Thank you, Reggie. Now, our speaker this afternoon is Edward Larson, who will be followed by Brookline's poet laureate, Jennifer Barber. Professor Larson is the Hugh and Hazel Darling Chair in Law and University Professor of History at Pepperdine University in California. He's the author of too many articles for me to list here and too many books for the small amount of time I have. But his books include Summer for the Gods, The Scopes Trial, and America's Continuing Debate Over Science and Religion, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize. Professor Larson has lectured and taught throughout the world, and we are greatly honored to have Professor Larson as our keynote speaker today, and our ability to get an advanced copy of his book out in the lobby. Professor Larson?
Wow, those poems. And you are right. Montpelier has transformed. I went there when it only told one side of the story, and I went back as it was being transformed. Thank you for your role there. And the museum here in Boston, phenomenal. I urge all of you to get both places. And your poem, you saw me there just letting it roll over me. It was beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me up here, back up to Boston on a snowy day, just like I remember so well. Wonderful to be here to Brookline. Now, some historians say that the American Revolution began in Boston on March 4, 1770, with the Boston Massacre. And if so, the first to die in combat was a freed or fugitive black named Crispus Attucks. I heard a bell ring, upon which I ran toward the townhouse. Robert Goddard testified after the massacre. I went and stood near the sentry box by the custom house. I saw an officer come toward the box with a party of men, having a drawn sword in his hand. Heard him frequently repeat, "Clear the way, clear the way." The officer was Thomas Preston, then serving with one of Britain's army regiments stationed in Boston to enforce Parliament's Townshend taxes on the colonists. His party consisted of some 7 armed British soldiers dispatched to protect a lone British sentry besieged by boys and men outside the custom house. After quoting Preston as ordering the taunting crowd to stand off, this witness added, a sailor then struck the officer, upon which he said, "Damn you, I will not be used in such manner." And immediately he said, "Fire, fire." At first one, then more soldiers discharged their muskets. Goddard testified, after which, and again I'm quoting him, he saw 4 men laying on the ground, one of which was the deceased Crispus Attucks. Several witnesses depicted Attucks as the first to fall, and 2 portrayed him as leading a party of sailors to the scene. One had Attucks striking Preston, but others maintained that he was a bystander. In all, 3 civilians died on the spot and 2 later of their wounds. Denouncing the episode as a horrid massacre, the Boston Gazette portrayed Attucks as a mixed-race sailor from Framingham who died instantly with 2 balls entering his breast, one of them goring the right lobe of the lungs most horribly. Later accounts described him as part African and part Native American, roughly 46 years old, with an imposing build, over 6 feet tall. The Gazette depicts the massacre as the climax of several days of rising tension between British soldiers and young workers, and young local workers, including sailors, deprived of jobs by those poorly paid soldiers stationed in Boston by the British to enforce the hated Townshend tariffs, who, these British soldiers, for a few bits of spending money, took odd jobs away from locals during off-duty hours. Now, no one ever definitively ascertained why Attucks joined those at the customs house. Witnesses reported seeing him leaving dinner as the commotion grew outside, brandishing a club and leading a party of sailors. Over a century later, at the dedication of a monument to those killed at the massacre here in Boston, historian John Frisk said of Attucks and his part in the events of March 5, 1770. From this time until independence was won, there was hardly a struggle in which brave men of his race and color did not notably acquit themselves. This much is true, and Fisk said it well without committing to Atticus' role that day. Atticus could have been a revolutionary leader who died in defense of liberty, or simply a large and looming presence targeted for his race, a story that continues to today. Atticus left no written record. In this, he differed from the man we celebrate today, Martin Luther King Jr., who left a profound and eloquent body of writing. But let's not overlook some telling similarities, some mystic chords linking these two men. Both were brutally struck down in the prime of life. At the time of their murders, both were crusading for economic justice. King in Memphis to support striking black sanitation workers, Atticus standing with Bostonians in defense of working-class jobs. In death, both became martyrs to the cause of economic justice as well as liberty. Now, some historians say that the American Revolution began 5 years later at nearby Lexington and Concord, when British troops marching to disperse Patriot forces there fought the local militia in the first two battles of the Revolutionary War. 8 militia soldiers died and dozens more were injured at Lexington in a hail of British musket fire, including Prince Easterbrook, an enslaved black militiaman. More blacks fought at Concord and the ensuing siege of Boston and the Battle of Bunker Hill. The free black soldier Salem Poor received a citation for bravery at Bunker Hill. And John Trumbull's iconic painting of the battle shows Saba, an enslaved black, holding a musket alongside his wounded white owner. Blacks made up only about 2% of the Massachusetts population then, with most of them enslaved. But they made up a larger share of the local militia, up to 10%, serving with distinction and typically gaining freedom for their service. When the Virginia plantation owner George Washington took command of the New England forces besieging Boston in 1775, one of his first steps, he initially tried to purge it completely of black troops. But he soon reversed his order because of widespread opposition and the growing realization that he could not have successfully pursued the fight without them. Every New England state relied heavily on local blacks to fill their quotas of troops during the Revolution, with Rhode Island fielding an entire black regiment. If enslaved, these blacks inevitably demanded and received their freedom for their service, much as, in Martin Luther King's day, returning black servicemen from World War II and from the Korean War propelled the civil rights movement in the 50s and fought to end Jim Crow segregation. Now, some historians say that the expulsion of British troops from Boston in 1776 marked the crucial turning point in the war, an event made possible by New England troops seizing the British fort at Ticonderoga and in placing its cannon on Dorchester Heights. Among the British militia troops participating in that mission, a freeborn indentured servant named Lamal Haynes from central Massachusetts contracted typhus on the campaign and returned home to study theology, becoming the first ordained minister of color in any American church. A disciple of New Light Congregationalism, which didn't differ too much in theology than that of Martin Luther King, Haynes became a key voice linking religion with abolition. Slavery had its origins in hell, Haynes declared, but liberty in heaven. Even an African has equally as good a right to his liberty in common with Englishmen, he told white parishioners. Citing the biblical golden rule, Haynes declared, "We should not impose anything upon others but what we should be willing to be imposed upon us." While hailing Americans for fighting for freedom from British oppression, he condemned them for condoning what he called the much greater oppression of slavery. Liberty, he said, liberty is equally as precious to a black man as to a white one, he declared. And so that creed spread among Congregationalists in New England, the first American denomination to join the Quakers in denouncing slavery. Here Haynes stood like Martin Luther King, two black Protestant ministers calling on Christians to renounce racism and embrace Christian love. Uniting faith with action, they advanced liberty and justice for all. Now, some historians say petitions and publications by free and enslaved blacks boosted the cause of abolition in Massachusetts, which, with a Revolutionary War still raging, became the first American state to end slavery within its borders. Those petitions began even while British troops still occupied Boston and increased as the struggle for liberty progressed after their departure. White patriot leader James Otis Jr., perhaps the most important of the early revolutionary voices, had set the tone in his first pamphlet attacking the Stamp Act. He wrote, "No man can take my property from me without my consent. If he does, he deprives me of my liberty and makes me a slave," Otis wrote in 1764, a dozen years before the Revolution, adding, "The colonists are by the law of nature, freeborn, as indeed are all men, white or black." A group of free and enslaved blacks led by Felix Holbrook followed Otis's plea with a series of 3 petitions to the Massachusetts General Assembly and one to the governor asking for the end of slavery. "We pray for such relief which to us will be as life from the dead." A print edition of these petitions rebuked white patriots for this people to be talking of liberty and at the same time to be importing and making slaves of whole cargoes of their fellow creatures is a syllogism of language. All people who ever inhabit within this province should enjoy the same liberties. Caesar Sartor, a free black living just north of Boston, drew on these freedom petitions to publish an address in his local newspaper, uniting the cause of American and African liberty. Born free in Africa, transported as a youth to America, and enslaved for 2 decades before regaining his freedom, Sartor addressed his appeal to the slaveholders in Massachusetts. "At this time of great anxiety and distress among you on account of the infringement of the natural rights of privileges of freeborn men by the British, permit me to tell you about slavery and liberty," he wrote. "As slavery is the greatest and consequently the most dreaded of all temporal calamities, so is the opposite. Liberty is the greatest temporal good. Turning their rhetoric against them, he asked white patriots, "Now, if you are sensible that slavery is in itself and in its consequences a great evil, why will you not pity and relieve the poor, distressed, enslaved African?" Sartre linked the cause of white patriots to that of their enslaved servants. "Would you desire the preservation of your own liberty? As a first step," he wrote, "let the oppressed Africans be liberated." In a revolutionary age, the writings of Holbrook, Sartre, and other Massachusetts blacks helped to awaken the moral conscience of a freedom-seeking people to the injustice of African slavery, much as 2 centuries later, King's searing letter from Birmingham jail awakened white Americans to the injustice of the segregation of Africans in their midst. "Because the goal of America is freedom," King declared, "abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with the destiny of America. We will prevail together." Now, the revolutionary agitation in Massachusetts led in 1780 to a new state constitution, the first one having been rejected by voters because it did not end slavery. And this new constitution in 1780 implicitly abolished slavery. But, as some historians say, it took lawsuits by enslaved blacks to make those words a reality. One lawsuit involved the woman shown on the cover of the program today. Mumbet, who, upon her freedom, took the name Elizabeth Freeman. By 1781, the wife of John Ashley, Mumbet's owner, had hit her, Mumbet, one too many times. The last time leaving a lasting scar from a scalding hot fire shovel, and that scar you can see in the picture on the cover. Bet went to court. "I heard that paper read yesterday," she said. "It says that all men are born equal." She's quoting directly from the Massachusetts Constitution that had just been adopted. She said, "Ask a local white lawyer, won't the law give me my freedom?" He agreed to take her case and argued it squarely on the state constitution. It worked. A local trial jury found for Bet, and Ashley did not appeal. But it was a pair of cases from 1783 involving Cork Walker that were even more important for finally putting the nail in the coffin of slavery in Massachusetts. Unlike in Bet's case, a former owner had promised to free Walker when he reached the age of 25. That owner died before Walker reached 25, however, and Walker passed to the owner's son-in-law, Nathaniel Jennison, who refused to honor the promise. When he reached 25, Walker walked away anyway. After Jennison pursued, beat, and kidnapped him, Walker sued Jennison for his injuries, and the state indicted Jennison for criminal assault. Everything turned on whether Walker remained enslaved to Jennison, because under Massachusetts law, the old law, a slaveholder was not liable for injuring his own property. Unremarkably, the jury found for Walker based on his prior owner's promise, and Jennison did not press his appeal. The criminal case, though, against Jennison proceeded to the Supreme Judicial Court in 1783, where Chief Justice William Cushing instructed the jury regarding Walker's status. The idea of slavery is inconsistent with our state constitution. Under that document, he ruled, slavery is as effectively abolished as it can be. During the 1780s, lawsuits brought by blacks like Bet Ann Walker, abolished slavery in Massachusetts, much as 2 centuries later, suits brought by blacks like Oliver Brown in Brown versus Board of Education and Mildred Loving in Loving versus Virginia helped to end segregation in America. Martin Luther King supported those suits. Thurgood Marshall handled many of them in the courts. Lawsuits, along with petitions, writings, preaching, and direct action by blacks and whites advanced the cause of racial freedom and equality in revolutionary Massachusetts, just as they would propel the civil rights movement in King's day. King used all of these means that were pioneered in Massachusetts 2 centuries earlier, used them effectively in the 1950s and 60s. Indeed, America's first great emancipation occurred during the Revolutionary era, led by this state and by Pennsylvania, when the North ended slavery. America's second great emancipation came with the Civil War, when troops, including the fabled 54th Massachusetts Regiment of Black Soldiers, ended slavery in the South. America's third emancipation came during last century's civil rights movement under Martin Luther King. Now it is our turn to continue the work of over 2 centuries. Your state's revolutionary legacy and Dr. King's example should light the way for us to embrace liberty and justice for all. Only then, to use King's glorious words, will all of God's children, black and white, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, "Free at last, free at last. Thank Almighty God, we are free at last. Let us make his dream our own." Thank you.
Next, Joyful Voices of Inspiration will perform 3 additional songs.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're Joyful Voices of Inspiration. We started in Brookline in 1999. We're a community choir. We're non-denominational. We're an educational organization, and we try to promote the beauty of gospel music, not only as a very incredible, unique African-American art form, but also an incredibly inspirational, motivational medium of music that can only come from the Black experience in America. And so we celebrate gospel music, and we are glad to sing for you today. Our first number is going to be an adaptation of Lift Every Voice and Sing, but this was put together by Donnell Patterson, our director. And it's sort of a new mashup of James Weldon Johnson's lyrics. And it says at the end, let us march on until victory is won. Beautiful job. So the next song we're going to sing is called Sign Me Up. The song says, "Sign me up for the Christian Jubilee." This sounds like an old traditional gospel song, but actually it was written last year by a guy named Brandon Boyd, who was a music teacher at the University of Missouri. He's 37 years old. And when I first saw this song, I said, Christian Jubilee, what the heck is that? And then I thought that back in the day, there was a group called the Fisk Jubilee Singers from Fisk University, but I still didn't know what that meant. Well, I looked it up. And the reference comes from the book of Leviticus, actually, because the year of Jubilee was when God commanded the freedom for all those who were captives. Sort of makes sense for this day's meeting. So in the black church, a Jubilee became a commemoration of what a group of people would do, slaves mostly, to celebrate their freedom. So for example, Maryland declared an abolition of slavery in 1864 on the 1st of November. So on the night of October 31st in 1864, as the hour of midnight approached, the heads of all the colored people in the area bowed their heads in solemn consecration of their new life of freedom that was approaching. And at the stroke of midnight, the preacher proclaimed, "Now, chillin', you can sing if you want. You belong to nobody but the Lord now." Sang. Well, sing they did, and it was like the voice of the winds flowing through the fields and the forest, mingling with the chime of waterfalls, rolling out on the still sweet breath of that November morn. Sign me up for the Christian Jubilee. And lastly but not leastly, we're going to end with a song called I Have a Dream, written by none other than Donnell Patterson. This song takes a little bit from the Bible and a little bit from Martin Luther King's talk at the Lincoln Memorial when he said, I have a dream. And Donnell mashed it together in a wonderful contemporary style. And so this is I Have a Dream.
All right, y'all gotta sing along on this one. It's really easy. Really easy. It says, I have a dream. I have a dream. Let's go, choir.
From every mountainside, let freedom reign. I have a dream today, we shall overcome. From every mountainside, let freedom reign. I have a dream today, we shall overcome. Every mountain shall be exalted.
if nothing else, our program has lifted your spirits and woken you up. Hopefully you'll be able to sleep tonight. But I think that many of us will just be remembering the exciting performances at today's program. Brookline is a community with tons of boards and commissions, as many of you know, but also many organizations doing different things, helping different parts of the community, addressing different issues that presented here in the community as well as elsewhere. And we'd like to spotlight two organizations here in Brookline that play an important role to important parts of our community. And we'd first like to start off with the Brookline Asian American Family Network to give us to give us a little bit of information about what they do and the role they play here in Brookline. And following that, Brookline for the Culture will do the same. So, Julianne?
Thank you, MLK Celebration Committee, for lifting the Brookline Asian American Family Network today. I am a BAFN Steering Committee member, Shulan Chang, and I have a story to share about what we've been up to over the last 6 months, our little dream. But first, let me take you back 150 years. Imagine you're Chinese, one of the underpaid 12,000 workers doing perilous back-breaking work, blasting dynamite through granite in below freezing temperature, building the Transcontinental Railway, that amazing feat of engineering and infrastructure that unified America by connecting the East and West coasts. But after years of toil, you're not invited to the official Grand Golden Spike Celebration Day, and you appear nowhere in that historic photo, despite the fact that you and your fellow Chinese made up 80% of the workforce. Next, imagine you're an ethnic Japanese American citizen. 80 years ago in 1942, you and your family were rounded up, your personal property confiscated. 120,000 of you were stripped of your constitutional rights and freighted on crowded trains to 10 distant internment camps. You don't have a story, you don't even have a name. Instead, you and your family are given a 5-digit number to wear on a string around your necks. They say it's to protect you. Really? Then why are the guns on the guard towers in the camp pointed inwards, not out? These two stories evoke gut-wrenching emotions. What about all the other stories that make up the Asian American DNA? Should they continue to be erased? Locked away from view? Last May, the students of APAC, the Asian Pacific American Club at Brookline High School, said no. They convened PSB and BHS leadership, curriculum coordinators, and teachers in the MLK room and appealed for a curriculum that gives AAPI history and stories their due respect. They presented their wish list of 72 books by and about AAPI to be made available at the Brookline High School Library. Lily Lockwood said, as a graduating senior who hasn't read a single book with an Asian character as part of the English curriculum at BHS, I want better for my brother, a rising freshman. I want him to be able to read a book with his class where he can relate to characters, feel comfortable discussing the book with his class, and see his story reflected. It took me and many others a while to realize that we didn't feel seen and why that was. Including us isn't a big ask, but it will have big effects. That's when Baffin decided to quit listening to all the talk and start doing. But one, we wanted to make it sure that the courageous crop of APAC seniors can experience the fruit of their activism. And two, we wanted to dedicate this VHS AAPI book collection to a phenomenal Asian American educator, Li Hua Zhang Shorter, who had just announced her retirement after 25 years. We enlisted the help of the Brookline Booksmith and purchased 2 copies of 50 titles from the curated list and held a surprise unveiling of the AAPI book collection right before graduation day 2022. Thank you. Working with the Booksmith, we marveled at the rich universe of contemporary Asian American literature. We ended up obliging our greed, and our AAPI book collection for Brookline High School ended up including the works of all these authors. Now, isn't it always more meaningful when we can mobilize a whole community to reach a goal together? On August 1st, we launched the GoFundMe campaign for our AAPI book collection for Brookline High School. We weren't wrong. By September, we had raised over $10,000, enough to buy nearly 400 books and still gift a reserve fund to purchase additional books in the future. Because of course, writers keep writing. However, one question kept nagging at us. What about the little brothers and sisters in elementary school? We know how much the recent activities of the Brookline Community Foundation reflect their commitment to equity and racial justice. We scrambled for 10 days to complete a BCF grant request to fund the AAPI book collection for Brookline K-8 schools. By October, our project got the green light. What Dr. King said is really true. Take that first step, even if you don't see the whole staircase. On October 31st, we celebrated the retirement of Li Hua Shorter with so much love. We presented hundreds of AAPI books to our amazing students and teachers, and presented a check for future books to the librarians. That's the day our stories arrived. And they're glorious. But let's make sure we share them beyond our own Asian American echo chamber. And I'd like to leave you today with a favorite nugget of wisdom from Dr. King again. We may all have come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. Last December, Brookline Town Meeting, that's just a month ago, Brookline Town Meeting unanimously passed a resolution designating May as AAPI Heritage Month and established an official town AAPI Heritage Celebration Day. So we're gonna have a day for us, just like you do for you. We invite you all to join us on May 20th for our inaugural AAPI Heritage Day celebration. You and I, our stories may be so different, but it's through sharing them that we may be able to experience empathy and happiness for each other. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Adina Walker, and this is
Zariana Katakashian-Jones.
And together we are Brookline for the Culture. Yeah. So in 2020, I had just come back from Brooklyn and being there for 12 years. I'm from originally Brookline. It's confusing. And I was like, oh, we're not doing anything for Juneteenth. That's really weird. And not everybody can participate going to a march. So I created the first ever Juneteenth, albeit virtually, and then Zariana did it
In person.
with a march. And so we didn't do 2021 nor 2022. However, we decided to come back for 2023 with our group For the Culture. So we want to not only have Juneteenth be raised up, but also events throughout the year, making sure that they're for all ages, hopefully for younger parts of Brookline, POC as well, so people of color, and allies, of course. And yesterday we had our first ever event, which was a whiz sing-along that was held here on Saturday at 2 o'clock, and we had, 100 people for a Saturday. So we're hoping to do more events just like that, not only to raise money, but also to raise awareness.
And we just want to thank everyone so much for having us here today. Rob, Caitlin, and Bernard Green really worked hard to include us in the celebration, and we are so thankful to be here with you all today. So thanks.
So it's important to spotlight the various organizations in Brookline doing various things. And I want to sort of emphasize something that was said earlier, and that is, as Martin Luther King said, we came here on separate ships, we're in the same boat now. You know, we've suffered a lot of hate crimes in this country over the last, well, a long time, but especially over the last few years. And unfortunately, too often we react to those hate crimes as if they're individual crimes. But I think what's important to realize is that, and I think Martin Luther King realized this, and others, is that hate is indivisible. And in order to address hate, we all have to make sure that we're working for the same goal. And that is one of the goals of the Martin Luther King Celebration Committee, to make sure that we understand that when you talk about racial justice, it's a broad concept. It's not just one incident here, one incident there. But hate is indivisible, and our efforts against hate have to be indivisible also. Our next speaker is going to be Brookline's Poet Laureate, Jennifer Barber, who's going to be reading a contemporary poem. But it's a poem that you will see has a link to today's program and the keynote speak of Ed Larson in a way that may surprise you, I think, but it's going to be very good. We're very honored to have Jennifer Barber as our Poet Laureate, and to have her here today to read a poem that she'll describe, Natasha Thruway, called Enlightenment.
Thank you, Bernard, and the Celebration Committee. It's such an honor to be part of this day, and I've loved hearing the performers and the presenters, so thank you all. So today I'm happy to read a poem by former U.S. Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey. Her bio is printed in your program, as is her poem, if you'd like to follow along. Natasha was born in Gulfport, Mississippi in 1966 to Eric Trethewey and Gwendolyn Ann Turnbow, who had met as college students. Gwendolyn Turnbow was black and Eric Trethewey was white. They had traveled to Ohio to marry because their marriage was illegal in Mississippi at the time. Natasha's father would become a poet and literature professor, and her mother would become a social worker. The poem Enlightenment describes, in part, Natasha's conversations over the years with her father about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. According to the Monticello website, rumors of the Jefferson-Hemings affair began to circulate among Jefferson's neighbors in the early 1800s as they noticed that some of the enslaved children strongly resembled Jefferson. Also, according to the website, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation formed a research committee which reported in 2000 that the weight of the evidence, including a DNA study and original documents, shows, quote, a high probability that Thomas Jefferson was the father of all 6 of Sally Hemings' children listed in Monticello records. And the poem is from her 2012 collection entitled Thrall. So this is Enlightenment. In the portrait of Jefferson that hangs at Monticello, he is rendered two-toned. His forehead white with illumination, a lit bulb, the rest of his face in shadow, darkened as if the artist meant to contrast his bright knowledge, its dark subtext. By 1805, when Jefferson sat for the portrait, he was already linked to an affair with his slave. Against a backdrop, blue and ethereal, a wash of paint that seems to hold him in relief, Jefferson gazes out across the centuries, his lips fixed as if he's just uttered some final word. The first time I saw the painting, I listened as my father explained the contradictions. How Jefferson hated slavery, though, out of necessity, my father said, had to own slaves, that his moral philosophy meant he could not have fathered those children. Would have been impossible, my father said. For years, we debated the distance between word and deed. I'd follow my father from book to book, gathering citations, listen as he named, like a field guide to Virginia, each flower and tree and bird, as if to prove a man's pursuit of knowledge is greater than his shortcomings, the limits of his vision. I did not know then the subtext of our story, that my father could imagine Jefferson's words made flesh in my flesh. The improvement of the blacks in body and mind in the first instance of their mixture with the whites. Or that my father could believe he'd made me better. When I think of this now, I see how the past holds us captive, its beautiful ruin etched on the mind's eye. My young father, a rough outline of the old man he's become, needing to show me the better measure of his heart, an equation writ large at Monticello. That was years ago. Now we take in how much has changed. Talk of Sally Hemings. Someone asking, how white was she? Parsing the fractions as if to name what made her worthy of Jefferson's attentions. A near white quadroon mistress, not a plain black slave. Imagine stepping back into the past, our guide tells us then. And I can't resist whispering to my father, this is where we split up. I'll head around to the back. When he laughs, I know he's grateful I've made a joke of it. This history that links us, white father, black daughter, even as it renders us other to each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that poem, which I hope people can think about its connection to today's program. It's not an easy connection, but it's there, and it's very helpful to make that, because it gives a little more substance, a little more dimension to Professor Larson's presentation. So, we're at the end, right, Rob? The Brookline Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee would like to thank all those who made this year's event possible, which was a celebration of many dedicated organizations and individuals, and the full list is in the program. You know, after, 3 years of being on Zoom, 2 or 3 years being on Zoom, it wasn't easy to sort of get back to reality of an in-live or in-person event. But we've done it. A few nicks here and there, but we did it. And I think everyone appreciates the ability for us to sit in an audience and listen to a lecture at the highest level that we got from Professor Larson. Reggie Gibson's incredible performance, the incredible music of the choir, and of course to end up the reading of the poem by Jennifer Barber. I mean, it would be different if this was on Zoom. And so I'm glad that we are able to do this live and in person, and hopefully we'll continue to be able to be live and in person in future years. But you never know. You never know. I want to give special recognition to the Brookline Interactive Group, which will broadcast today's program. Okay, let's... BIG is Brookline's cable access station, and they do an incredible job, both for organizations like the MLK Committee, but also the town of Brookline. I mean, how could we have continued existing without the work that BIG did to enable us to operate as a democratic elected town meeting and select board through Zoom? Without them, I don't know what we would have done. We just would not have been able to go forward. They will broadcast today's program on their YouTube channel, I believe beginning tomorrow. So tell your friends who are not able to make it today that they can watch the program on the YouTube channel. I also want to thank Brookline Community Foundation which helped fund today's program. An incredible contribution that made a lot of this possible. And of course, the Coolidge Corner Theater, which has hosted our event almost from the beginning, if not from the beginning. And they're an incredible host, and we thank them for all that they do. I also want to thank I also want to thank Brookline's Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, particularly Caitlin Starr, who's somewhere in the audience, who provides invaluable assistance to the MLK Committee and many other organizations around town. Harvey Brovman, who edited and provided the video clip of Bobby Nabel that we saw earlier. Yeah. And finally, the Brookline Booksmith, for making making Professor Larson's book available in the lobby, and of course it'll be available tomorrow when it's officially issued to the public, I guess. Yeah. As part of its recognition of the important role that Martin Luther King played in opening opportunities for all, and in keeping with its commitment to increase diversity, the town of Brookline has pledged to make available to the public information, including biannual reports on the racial and gender composition of its workforce, to show how far we have progressed in terms of diversity, openness, and inclusion. The most recent EEO4 report from 2021, along with other Town of Brookline diversity and inclusion data, can be found on the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations webpage on the town's website under the I guess, menu page, Data and Reports Central. That's a tab at the webpage. So with that, thank you for attending the town's 2023 Martin Luther King celebration event, and I hope everyone enjoyed both the substance of the event and being together in person here at the beautiful Coolidge Corner Theater.